We have spent time this past week in PLCs identifying essential standards for each class. We have continued our conversations about our values and beliefs as we will move to identifying the essential social and behavioral standards we will all collectively teach and reteach with our students. Now we will look at our own growth in instruction, our essential elements in the focused model of instruction. Each certified staff member is required each year to submit a growth plan. This plan aligns to our focus here at Wyandotte. These goal areas will help us provide consistent, equitable opportunities to our students across all classes. Just as with our essential standards in our classes, our essential elements will not be the only thing we work on in our instructional practices, but they are the elements we can guarantee are consistently developed in all classes by all teachers. Teacher growth plans are based on the focused model of instruction and aligned to the Wyandotte Red Box instructional focus. Teacher growth plans this year will focus on 3 essential elements for our work with remote learning and will carry over and remain the same when we return to on-site learning. Our first goal element is identifying critical content from the standards. This is required in every lesson. Please review the focus statement and desired effect for this element. The critical content is the important part of the learning in the particular lesson. It requires that the lesson task is aligned to the taxonomy of the target. Take a moment to listen to Dr. Marzano's commentary about this element.
The teacher uses the progression of standards-based learning targets embedded within a performance scale to identify accurate critical content during a lesson or part of a lesson. And I think if we explain that, it becomes clear why it's this is the only element that is required in every lesson, correct?
Absolutely, but why would it be required in every lesson?
Here's why. Again, that focus statement is a mouthful, but almost every word is really important. During any given lesson, there's so much information that's coming at a student. If you can kind of get inside a student's head, during a lesson, the teacher's talking, they're watching video recordings, they're listening to other students, and one of the critical responsibilities of a teacher, I believe, is to continually point out of all that information, what's critical. There's a lot of different ways of doing that. It can be very informal, to very, very implicit versus very, very explicit. The added part is that the critical content the teacher identifies has to be directly related to the standard they're focusing on, and then the translation of that standard into the progression of knowledge. The reason this is so important is that, and required, is that without this, a teacher could actually be doing a fairly good job of a lot of instructional activities and covering a lot of content. But the net effect might be that students are very confused as to what's important and what's not important, and students process different things as important. So without the teacher there to kind of mediate the process, it's just content, kind of all over the place. That's why this is identifying the critical content is maybe one of the most, if not the most critical instructional strategy element, that a teacher has to attend to. Would you agree?
I would agree, and that's why the desired effect is that really students have to know what's important and what content is not important as it relates to the learning target.
Yeah, and actually for observers or administrators who maybe aren't making a formal observation, simply asking the students, well, what'd you learn from that? What was the important stuff there? And you'd be surprised how when a teacher doesn't execute this element well, how diverse those responses will be. And when a teacher does execute this element well, the students will be able to say, well, this was important, and actually ideally get to the place where they kind of see how it all fits together, and they can articulate that.
And something else I'd like to point out, that really this identifying critical content, we can relate that right back to planning because that's where it all starts.
That's
when
true.
you identify those learning targets, you have them in that progression. So it's really the foundational point of every lesson.
Absolutely.
Our second goal element is helping students process new content. This element will be more challenging in the remote environment, but is very important in helping students understand the content. Key to the element is that students must be processing the content in groups with their peers. Let's listen to Dr. Marzano's explanation.
The element helping students process new content. What does that focus statement entail?
Well, the focus statement is teacher systematically engages student groups in processing and generating conclusions about new content. The important piece there is the in groups. So processing is just what it sounds like when, if you can think of a student and something new has been presented, or it could be something that the student actually has already had experience with. The student, you have to think about it. You just don't, working memory only holds a little bit of information and it doesn't hold it for very long. If we want to integrate that information with our long-term memory, store it within our long-term memory, you have to loop through it. You have to do things with it. The doing things with it almost automatically means there has to be at least some interaction with other people. I guess it's theoretically possible to process by yourself, but it's much more efficient and it's probably creates much more rigor if you're somehow interacting with other people. And as you know, there's a whole bunch of strategies embedded here. Some have an awful lot of interaction that's built in with other students, and some have not quite as much. But that's a critical part, the group interaction.
And so why are kids, what are they doing while they're processing in these groups?
Oh, some important stuff would include, some of the important elements would include that they're actually putting it all together, they're summarizing, that they're making predictions as to what will come next. They're generating conclusions. They're coming up with statements, maybe not explicit statements, although it doesn't hurt if they actually make it explicit, about how it all fits together and stated in ways that aren't verbatim from what they heard or read. And most of the processes, the specific strategies have those elements: the summarization, the summarization, the predicting, the generalization.
So really what you've just explained is the desired effect of this element is that after working and processing in groups, that students can summarize and make generalizations about new content.
Absolutely.
As a result of interacting with other students.
And if they can't do that, the interaction probably didn't work very well.
Absolutely. They weren't actually processing content.
That's right.
Our third and final growth plan element is using formative assessment to track progress. This element ties right into our formative assessment and feedback work with the remote learning plan. Students are to understand where they are, where they need to go, and what it takes to get there. A progression of learning or scale is necessary for this element. And assessments must be used over time for students to have opportunity to show growth in their learning. Here is Dr. Marzano on this element.
Well, the focus statement reads, the teacher uses formative assessments to facilitate tracking of student progress on one or more learning targets. So if we pull that apart, formative assessment, by definition means that it's assessments over time. It's not just, one assessment. It also implies that students will get better, that you'll see an increase in their knowledge. This goes hand in glove with the whole notion of our the scales, the proficiency scales or performance scales, that the teacher designs. So with those in place, now you have a pretty powerful tool, a visual tool, if you will, if you use graphs to show students where they started, where they are, and ultimately where they end up.
So how is using formative assessment to track progress, how can that be as part of a condition for learning?
Remember, condition for learning, the elements that are under the domain conditions for learning, those are the mental states and processes that students have, or hopefully those mental states and processes are cued by the teacher activity. In this case, the mental state that students, that is generated in students is they understand what they're supposed to be learning, where they started, where they are right now, and what they have to do to get better. So it's a condition that is all too often ignored, kind of in a traditional classroom. But when you're using performance scales and collecting assessment data around those performance scales, you've set up a new awareness on the part of students, and so you've set up a condition that isn't there in the traditional classroom.
Yeah, so what you've done is just explain the desired effect of using this element.
Which is, go ahead, want me to do it?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Well, that students understand, where they are, where they started, where they want to go, and what it takes to get to where they want to go. So there's this really metacognitive awareness of the topic, and their progress within that topic.
Our 3 growth plan goals this year go hand in hand with the Red Box focus at Wyandotte. Strengthening our implementation of these 3 elements will create the conditions that students feel accepted and a part of a community of learners, and that they understand the learning goals, how what they are doing connects to those goals, and how they are individually progressing toward achieving those goals. In order to strengthen our collective implementation, 6 specific action steps are to be included in all growth plans. You will attach evidence of the implementation of these steps by the end of each quarter. I think you will see that these action steps are not something on top of what we are already doing, but instead names what we are doing and allows us to stay focused on them. Action Step 1 identifies that you will actively participate in a PLC to strengthen your development and focus on improved student learning. Action Step 2 indicates that you will plan standards-based units with a progression of learning. Step 3 focuses on identifying critical content for students in every lesson and monitoring their ability to explain what's important to know. Step 4 is about engaging student groups in processing content. And action steps 5 and 6 are about the use of weekly formative assessment to monitor student progress and to create the conditions for a focus on growth and continuous improvement for each of your students. Your next steps include deadlines for the next 2 Fridays. Your first step is already completed as you confirmed your access to iObservation last week. By this Friday, please submit your growth plan. I have included step-by-step instructions for you attached to the email that included this video. It really can almost be a cut and paste task. There are also colleagues in each academy that are available to help you if you have questions. Once submitted, your administrator or evaluator will approve your plan. If edits are needed, please be sure they are completed by Friday, September 11th. Thank you for your continued focus on your professional growth and on creating the conditions for each student to feel empowered with their learning and to feel accepted and a part of a community of learners in your classroom, whether on site or remotely.